Welcome to the question and answer session of the Home Food Preservation course. The Home Food Preservation course is an asynchronous learning opportunity provided by the Missouri Extension's Nutrition and Health Specialty. You can join this course at any time online by visiting the University of Missouri Extension website and searching food preservation. Today I will be discussing with you the basics of canning pumpkin in the cubed fashion. My name is Rachel Buteman, and I am a dietitian with the University of Missouri Extension, working as a nutrition and health specialist in Phelps, Dent, and Crawford counties. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please type them into the comment section of this live video. I'll be happy to answer them during the session and follow up with you later for anything remaining. First off, let me highlight some key evidence-based resources available through the University of Missouri Extension. Along with the asynchronous learning opportunity of the Food Preservation Course 2020, we have a number of guides available on the Extension website. Today's course is following the guides Preserving Winter Squash and How to Can Fresh Vegetables. These are available to you any time of day to reference for your home food preservation. Another great resource is the National Center for Home Food Preservation. They have guides of all type for home food preservation, equipment recommendations, and tested recipes to reduce the risk of foodborne illness. Well, this Tuesday was the first day of fall, and you know what that means. Time for pumpkin everything. And we can use pumpkin in quite a few things. The pumpkin we can at home can be used similar to the canned pumpkin puree we typically buy from the store. The only difference is there's the added step to puree or mash the pumpkin after you've removed it from your canning jar cubed before using it in your recipe. You can add cubed or pureed pumpkin to a lot of dishes. It's already been blanched and pressure cooked, so it goes well in soups, hummus, and savory protein dishes like turkey chili or cheesy quiche. You can also use it more traditionally in pies, stuffed ricotta pastas, or bread products as a starch alternative. The one thing it really won't go well in is anything you need a little bit of a firmer texture or crunch to. So if you're preparing a squash and potato medley, a roasted fresh squash or pumpkin in the oven is going to be a better quality for you than using your canned pumpkin product. As with any time we cook, we need to follow food safety procedures. This is especially so when we are preparing food for long-term storage. We are particularly careful in selecting a safe process when canning pumpkins and winter squash. This is because it's not recommended to can mashed or pureed pumpkin or winter squash. Even though many of us are used to buying it in this form from the store for cooking and may desire to can it this way at home, the Extension Centers and National Center for Home Food Preservation recommend strongly against canning pumpkin in a mashed or pureed form. This is because the mashed consistency creates different levels of thickness throughout the jars, creating a variation in temperature penetration within the inside of the jar versus the exterior. Because we can't consistently predict how thin or thick each individual's puree will be at home, we can't give a precise recommendation as to time or temperature to fully kill off potential bacteria. Therefore, even though you may find a historical recipe for canning mashed or pureed pumpkin at home produced by the USDA in the 1970s and early 1980s, these have been withdrawn because further research has shown we do not have a predictable recipe to provide food safety when canning this way at home. Instead, the USDA recommends canning pumpkin and winter squash in 1-inch cubes, for which we can predict the temperature penetration. It is important to to can and process pumpkin and winter squash following precise and proven recipes because they are both low acid foods, meaning they have a pH of 4.6 or higher. Other types of low acid foods, such as red meats, seafood, poultry, milk, and all fresh vegetables besides some tomatoes, need to be processed at high temperatures and pressures using a pressure canner to destroy a significant amount of potential bacteria. Low acid foods especially are at risk for supporting the growth of Clostridium botulinum. Clostridium botulinum is a type of bacteria capable of producing toxins causing a serious illness called botulism under the right storage conditions. Taking food safety precautions to properly clean your produce, equipment, and surfaces, and following the precise directions in your food preservation recipes are all ways to limit your risk of foodborne illness. I will take you through the 6 steps on how to can pumpkin cubed. The procedures are provided by the National Center for Home Food Preservation. Step 1 is to clean all of the equipment. We need to clean the funnels, jar lifters, prods, jars, and pressure canner itself. We clean the pressure canner by using hot water and detergent. Also, check that your dial gauge has been tested within the last year. Dialed gauges can become uncalibrated. You can bring it to your local extension center to be tested. Being off by a few pounds can make a difference in your food safety because the recipes designed for this equipment are very precise. Be thorough and bring it by to be checked. Clean your jars using hot water and detergent and then keep them warm by submerging them in a simmering water bath in a large stock pot. You'll want to keep them warm until you're ready to fill them with food and process them. Step 2 is to select and prepare your pumpkin. Choose a small variety of pumpkin designed for baking and cooking. Examples include Peekaboo, Sugar Treat, Dickinson's Fields, Baby Pam, Triple Treat, Kentucky Field, Buckskin, and Chelsea. If you want to take on the challenge of preparing your carving style pumpkin, the large orange ones for recipes, they are food safe to eat. However, you'll find them to be more fibrous and stringy and less sweet than the baking variety. So if you're incorporating them into a pumpkin recipe, you'll need to plan in using additional sweetener or an added product like coconut milk to add sweetness and creaminess. When you're picking out your pumpkin, whether you've grown them at home or taken a weekend outing to a pumpkin patch, which is a fun way to be outside this time of year, you want to choose those that are unblemished with no soft spots or cracks. Once you have your pumpkin, wash it with clean water. You do not use soap. And then you will carve it with a sharp knife along the outsides to cut it in half and scoop out the contents. You can then cut them into quarters and peel off the pumpkin skin. Since the skin can be rather tough, I recommend practicing your best knife safety skills and being cautious. Cutting them into quarters can give you a nice piece to grip onto when you're peeling. Once you have removed the skin, you can then cut it into the 1-inch cubes you'll be canning. You'll blanch these in boiling water for 2 minutes, and this deactivates ripening enzymes in the produce flesh, allowing you a better product when it's canned. Step 3, review your process. As with any recipe, you need to read the entirety of the procedures before and again during performing the directions. Taking the time to study the recipe allows you to work smoother with less interruptions, and this reduces the potential exposure and contamination of your cooked pumpkin to the environment prior to processing. Canning pumpkin is a hot pack style. We blanch the pumpkin for 2 minutes and then fill them into the jars. You can use your canning prod to arrange the cubes for best fit. Then you fill the jar with cooking water using a ladle and the jar funnel. Use a ruler to confirm that you have 1-inch headspace, or adjust the jar contents if needed. Then wipe clean with a damp paper towel the top of the jar before applying the lid. Your lid needs to be new to this canning attempt and should be purchased within the last year in order to have its best adhesive quality. When putting on the band, turn it until it's only fingertip tight. Applying too much pressure and really cranking it on interferes with the quality of the vacuum seal. So fingertip tight is the goal. Step 4 is pressure canning. With your pressure canner, first place it on top of your heat source and fill it with 2 to 3 inches of hot water. The hot water comes from a large stock pot that has been simmering up until this point. Check to ensure you have your canner rack in the bottom of your pressure canner. This acts as a shelf barrier, keeping your jars off of the bottom of the canner and decreasing the risk of them breaking. Next, carefully put your jars into the pressure canner. Use a jar lifter as there is hot water in there, and be careful not to tilt the jars during this process. Any residue of your product that gets between the jar and the jar lid will decrease the quality of your seal. Next, fasten the canner lid on top, turning it into place. We are leaving the weight off of the weighted gauge and the petcock open for the dial gauges. This allows steam to be released through the vent during the initial heating process. We have turned the heating element on to high, and temperature is starting to build inside the pressure canner. We can see this happening as steam escapes through the vent on top. The steam will increase until it is a steady stream. Once this happens, turn on your timer for 10 minutes. We will let the steam vent for a full 10 minutes to allow oxygen inside of the pressure canner to escape. If we fail to allow it to vent, the oxygen pockets within the pressure canner will cause hot and cold spots within the pressure canner. This leads to increased water loss in our canned products. After 10 minutes has passed, you will place the weight on top of your weighted dial and your petcock closed on your dial gauge. This will start pressure building up inside of your pressure canner, a process that takes 3 to 5 minutes. You will watch the dial until it reaches the pounds per square inch of pressure recommended by the directions. The directions recommendations will differ depending on the type of product you're canning, the type of canner you're using, whether it's a dial gauge or a weighted gauge, and the elevation of your geographic location. Here in Dent, Phelps, and Crawford County, we are all under 2,000 feet above sea level. And so, for the dial gauge we're using in this example, we would use 11 pounds of pressure per square inch for our recipe. If you are using a weighted gauge, you will want to select 10 pounds of pressure if you are below 1,000 feet and 15 pounds of pressure if you are above 1,000 feet in your location. The Missouri Department of Natural Resources has elevation maps which you can inspect. After you have reached the recommended pressure per your gauge, you can start your process timer. It's important to allow your food to process the full time recommended in the directions. If you're doing pints, this is 55 minutes for pumpkins, and if you're doing quarts, this is 90 minutes for pumpkins. You will use the heat of your heating element to regulate the pressure in the canner. By applying more heat, the pressure will go up. By applying less heat, the pressure will go down. You will need to Regulate the heat slightly down in order to stabilize your pressure at the beginning of the canning process. Do so incrementally and very slowly as to not cause drastic heat changes within the canner, impacting your final quality. Additionally, check your dial often. If the pressure ever falls below the recommended level of 11 for this case, you will need to restart your processing time after you bring it back up to proper pressure. So that's restarting the 55 minutes for pints and the 90 minutes for quarts. Step 5, cooling. After you have processed 55 minutes for pints and 90 minutes for quarts, take the canner off of the heat and wait for it to depressurize, moving that dial all the way to 0. This takes about 30 minutes. During this time, leave the vent weight on and the petcock closed. After the canner is depressurized, remove the weight or open the petcock, and then wait an additional 10 minutes before removing the lid carefully. Remove the jars with the jar lifter and place them on a towel, leaving at least 1 inch of space between them. Then let the jars sit undisturbed to cool at room temperature for 12 to 24 hours prior to checking the seal and removing the band. Step 6, check for a proper seal and then store your product. There are 3 ways to test for a seal. The first one is to press the middle of the lid with your finger or thumb. If the lid springs up when you release your finger, this lid is unsealed and will need to be reprocessed. The second method is to tap the lid with the bottom of a teaspoon. If it makes a dull sound, the lid is unsealed and will need to be reprocessed. The third step is to hold the jar at eye level and look across the lid. The lid should be concave or dipped down. If it's flat or bulging, this means it is unsealed and will need to be reprocessed. If you've passed the seal tests, it's time to store them. You can remove the screw bands, wash the lid and jar in order to remove any calcified residue. You will need to label and date the jars. Be sure to include the name of the product, the date it was produced, and the processing method used. Store them in a clean, cool, and dark place. Do not store them in a place which will become hotter than 95 degrees Fahrenheit, such as near a hot pipe, a range, a furnace, or in direct sunlight. These and damp conditions will diminish the quality of your product and cause spoilage early. Step 7 is to enjoy your canned food product. Here's a recipe from the University of Missouri Extension Can Do Recipes series for using canned pumpkin. It's Becky's Hearty White Bean Pumpkin Chili. First, you're going to sanitize your cooking surfaces and then brown some ground beef in a skillet over medium heat until it's done. You'll drain away the fat and other residues. In a soup pot, mix the beef, some white beans, broth, and spices, as well as your canned pumpkin. Add water if the resulting mix is too thick. Cover and cook on low heat for 15 to 20 minutes until it is completely warmed through. Enjoy it right then or refrigerate leftovers for later dining. Thank you for joining me this evening. Don't forget about the great resources available on the University of Missouri Extension website, especially our Food Preservation 2020 course. You can join this course at any time and learn more about preserving food at home, whether it's canning, freezing, dehydrating, and more. Additionally, check out the National Center for Home Food Preservation for tested, safe recipes for preparing food at home. And join me for the next Q&A session. It'll be on November the 5th at 6:30 p.m. Go to the Phelps County Extension website to RSVP for that live course. I appreciate you joining me today, and safe canning to all of you.